Hello, classic rock fans. I am reporting just after seeing the new documentary Becoming Led Zeppelin, which was directed by Bernard MacMahon. This is a new documentary about the early history of the band Led Zeppelin. It covers what the individual members of Zeppelin did before they were in the band, how the four of them got together, their first tours, their first two albums, and it basically takes them right to the end of the 60s. So this is very much a look at 60s era Zeppelin. This documentary is an origin story, and I think it's a very effective one. It was excellent listening to all three principal members of the band, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, and Jimmy Page, who are all still alive, tell stories from their youth and talk about how they all connected with each other. And what makes it even better is that the filmmakers dug up an old interview that original drummer John Bonham did, in which he talks about his early days and the formation of the band. And apparently this is audio from an interview that has never aired. It's basically been lost to time or in some archive somewhere. Well, they found it, and it's a really special piece of audio because it's John talking about how the band got started, and his commentary fits in perfectly with what the other guys are talking about. It's almost as if he's answering the same questions that they are in present day. So, a very effective use of a piece of archival material. And it's good that it fits in so well because you only hear from the four members of Led Zeppelin in this documentary. This is not your typical talking head documentary where you have certain producers or friends of the band or spouses or anybody else. The only people you hear from in this documentary are the four players in the band. And that's effective because, frankly, all four of these guys are very likable on record. So it's nice to hear these stories, whether it be from their childhoods or when they first got together for that original jam session that made them realize they had something special, or if they're lamenting, the difficulty of touring America when they were used to touring a much smaller country back home. And I also think the documentary did a great job of pulling great archival footage and visuals for the stories that they tell. If you didn't know, John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page started off as session players, and they're on a bunch of early 60s records, but not like rock records. They're on soundtracks and more compositional stuff. But the great example from that is that they are on the James Bond song Goldfinger. And the documentary has this amazing footage of Shirley Bassey singing Goldfinger while they talk about recording in those sessions. It's just a very effective sequence that introduces their musical backgrounds. And I will say, it really made me appreciate Jimmy Page as a visionary. Because one of the things that you learn in this documentary is that when Led Zeppelin got their first record deal, they had an album done already. And Jimmy Page signed with Atlantic Records basically because Atlantic agreed not to interfere with the recording of the album at all and to not cut out singles of it and basically give the band complete creative control, which he said was essential for their success. And I found that to be very interesting because I know that Steve Miller has said very similar things about the importance of creative control. He got a similar deal when he signed with Capitol back in his early days. And it's just another example of how the best art is created when the artist does not have to answer to some corporate overlord. Now, as far as criticisms of the film, I don't really have many. It's obvious that the band was very involved in the making of this movie. And because of that, anything even remotely critical of the band is absolutely absent. They included a segment where they talked about how their first album got bad reviews, but that doesn't make the band look bad. It makes Rolling Stone look bad, It makes the early music critics look bad. So I was not surprised by that. And I don't expect them to get into the, Groupies stories or the Mud Shark story or, Laurie Maddox or anything sleazy like that, because that stuff all came later. And this isn't a warts and all documentary. This is a celebratory story. It's a celebratory origin story of the band. It's really meant to build up the legend and the mythos of Led Zeppelin. I would say my only criticism of what was kind of at least skimmed over, if not totally left out altogether, is the issue of plagiarism of blues artists that Led Zeppelin was very much criticized for, particularly in these early years. If you didn't know, they were sued by Willie Dixon in the 80s over the lyrics of Whole Lotta Love. And this was a huge case in the music industry. And it was because Led Zeppelin kind of became the flashpoint of white rock artists ripping off lyrics and riffs from black blues players. And I say ripping off because they would borrow things from blues players without giving any credit or, more importantly, royalties, money, So there had to be a legal reckoning for that. And I've been to Willie Dixon's Blues Heaven in Chicago, where that museum really talks about that kind of thing. And it's a sore point because at the time it was really disrespectful and borderline exploitative. Now, I don't think the guys in Zeppelin were meaning to exploit anybody, but it is important to give credit if you're borrowing not just a line, but entire verses and entire riffs and, entire songs. Like, if someone else wrote that, you got to give them credit. That's important. And they really skimmed over it in the documentary. Robert Plant says one sentence, he talks about how Jimmy Page had the music for Whole Lotta Love, and he says that he, stepped up in the recording session and just kind of started singing the Willie Dixon lyrics. And then a beat later he says something to the effect of, I took the very best of black music and put it through the ringer, i.e. put his spin on it, which is fine. I don't mind him saying that. I don't think that's out of line. But what I think is missing is something that acknowledged that he didn't really do that properly, that the black artists he was borrowing from didn't get proper credit until much later. And I don't think he needs to make a big deal out of it. If he had said something like, I sang the Willie Dixon lyric and it worked really well, but we got in a little trouble for that later. Something to acknowledge it. And maybe talked about how influential those black artists were on him, and maybe he could highlight a couple of those artists. I think that would have gone a long way in smoothing that whole controversy over. I think that would have been very effective and made them look even better as far as the documentary goes. But unfortunately, I felt they were playing it a little too close to the chest. I think they were playing, I think it borders on whitewashing territory. And that's kind of a big sticking point with the history of Led Zeppelin. It's important to acknowledge where they got a lot of that music from because it was so critical to their origin. I guess that's the only real criticism I have of the documentary. Everything else was done very well. There was some great visuals. There's not a lot of Led Zeppelin archival footage. They didn't record a lot of their early days on video. So the documentary makers had to get kind of creative with the footage they had. And I think they did. I think the visuals looked great. They, crossfaded video over each other and, turned up the contrast and stuff like that. And it looks cool. And they also played a couple of songs nearly all the way through multiple times. And that's very effective on the big screen. It's very immersive. So I enjoyed that too. I guess the last thing I'll say is, as a music fan, when you see a properly made documentary like this, you're kind of disappointed when it's over, because there's more to the story. There's a lot more to the Led Zeppelin story. And you wonder, can there be a sequel to this? Can they do one called Being Led Zeppelin, and then Life After Led Zeppelin, or something to that effect? I mean, would this have been, even better realized if it was like a 3-part miniseries on Netflix. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. That's just kind of where my brain as a music fan goes. I kind of felt the same way about the biopic I just saw about Bob Dylan, A Complete Unknown. Really good movie, but I kept thinking, like, okay, can there be a second one about the Rolling Thunder Revue? You know, can we get a movie about Bob's Christian years? And unfortunately, that's just too tall of an order. You know, we have to appreciate these productions when we get them because they're not easily made. So I want to give credit to Bernard MacMahon for directing a great documentary. It's a great example of something that I wish every classic rock band could have. You know, I love documentaries like these, and I think every classic rock band deserves a proper professional grade, theatrical grade documentary about their story. Something that has the rights to all their music, something that can get all of the principal members to sit down and talk about it, something that, you know, has clearance for all the media that their music was used in, because it's music history, and history presented well with good visuals and good music underneath it and interesting people talking about it. That's some of the best storytelling there is. I think this is a really good documentary. I don't know how long it's going to be in the theaters, but I would recommend you check it out if you're even a passing Led Zeppelin fan, because that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not a diehard Zeppelin fan. I'm a casual fan, and this made me appreciate them more. So if it's in the theater by you, I think it's worth checking out on the big screen, because they've got a big sound as a band. So the big screen, the big visuals, I think really works. But that's all I got to say about the documentary. Thumbs up for me. I hope you go see it. If you enjoyed this review, please check out some of the other concert and movie reviews I've done on this channel. If you're a classic rock fan, I guarantee I've talked about a different band or artist that you're a fan of. And if you're like a music documentary fan, I've reviewed a couple of classic rock documentaries and concert films and biopics. Like I said, I just reviewed A Complete Unknown with my buddy Chris. I've talked about Stop Making Sense, the Talking Heads concert film on this channel. I talked about Across 24 Nights by Eric Clapton. Saw that in the theater a couple years ago. So I think there's some stuff on this channel that you will enjoy. And if you are that fan of classic rock, please check out the podcast I do. It's all about classic rock. We had a phenomenal 2024, and this year is off to a great start already. So please hit subscribe, and please check out what we're doing on the podcast. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching this review. Go see Becoming Led Zeppelin, and keep rocking.
You're going to be called Led Zeppelin.
And I thought, that's a terrible name. But I couldn't come up with a better one, so Led Zeppelin we were.